resource to life for all of us. But in many parts of South Africa, water is in short supply and water shortages are becoming increasingly common. With the increasing amount of power outages and the inevitable effect that it's got on top of aging water infrastructure, we're going to be reviewing the year that was, and we'll also take a look at the outlook for 2023. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The Water Hour with BeLive Media and also the South African Water Chamber. I'm your host, Brigitte Limbanda from Cape Town, South Africa, and this live stream is brought to you by BeLive Media, the Water Chamber, and StreamYard. Now, this is an audience-centric show, and we'd love for you to comment, we'd love for you to participate, and if you've got any questions for us, please feel free to post those in the comments to our panelists. As usual, we're going to be welcoming from the South African Water Chamber, Fred Platt, Benoit Roy, Dr. Anthony Turton, and also Professor Hamid Kassan. So without any further ado, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, we were having this little bit of banter before the show started, and there's a lot to talk about. The year that was 2022 has been an interesting year on the water landscape, water and power. And I'm just wondering if before we even dive into what we had for the last year, what we also need to recognize is the water energy nexus, and that makes the situation in South Africa even more unique. So Benoit, if I can ask you to maybe just start with that and just give us a little bit of background as to why energy and water has to work together, why the one is not more important or less important than the other.
Sure, thanks. Hi, Brigitte and colleagues and viewers. Yeah, it's just been a very interesting year because the water energy nexus has been brought to the fore. I think a lot thought it was a fairy tale, but the reality is that without energy, you can't bring water to the cities and to the consumers, and without energy, you can't take the sewage out. And one of the main reasons why we live past 50 years old or 45 years old to on average in the developed world anyway to 80, 82 years old is that we bring clean water into the towns and we take waste and wastewater out of the towns. So very, very simplistically. So, you know, when you aspire to Ukraine as an energy secure nation, you realize that the goalposts have shifted some. But having said that, I think, you know, what's quite important to realize is that we've stabilized the Ministry of Department of Water Sanitation, not energy, admittedly, but, you know, we can't have everything. We've finalized a lot of policies. So not only the NIP 2050, but also the phase 2 of it, which is what do we do, how do we do it? We also published the ugly news of the blue and green drop reports, which is an abject failure. And The report said 97%, and the minister said 100% or 99% of water service authorities have failed and are incapable of fulfilling their mandate. I think we're on the same page, which has been, 10 years we weren't. I think that's quite important. And, you cannot appreciate and fix things if you're in denial. And so that's all been put, I think, clearly on the table. Yes, there's been no action on the waterfront, and what we saw at eThekwini with the floods. So, I mean, we're a land of extremes, right? There's no middle road, and it's either drought, day zero, Eastern Cape, or it's floods, which we had in the Karoo this week, but early on this year in eThekwini and Durban and surrounds. And most of the damage could have been avoided had the infrastructure been properly managed and had spatial planning taken place. Zero spatial planning in a metro of 4-5 million people in a province of 10-12 million is actually incredible. So what happened is you washed away the poor and the infrastructure that wasn't maintained and the likes. But I think, let's look at the good side of it. The good side of it is that it's not only energy, we can't take water and wastewater for granted. And the average person in the household, some are suffering 1-2 weeks at a time water shedding in Johannesburg as we speak now. And it's not all energy induced. I mean, it's partially energy induced. But the important thing is, if you look at Cape Town, it's fairly flat. And they have 500 pump stations between water and wastewater. And, the average water engineer doesn't really think about it. So why would the person in the street think about it? You need to put power, so electricity that is not available, to all of those to make sure that you can pressurize the system. And as Hamant says, keep it wet. And so the water supply system is designed to be wet. And when it dries out, it fails. And we saw that in Johannesburg, and it's still failing as we speak now. Because what happens is when the system runs dry, air replaces the water. And when you put water back into it, air compresses, water does not compress. You get water hammer, and you destroy weak, vulnerable pipelines. And we are seeing people without water for weeks on end. So the energy issue is or the lack of energy is highlighting how vulnerable our water systems are. And apart from Cape Town, all of our metros are in actual fact starting to collapse at quite a drastic rate. So we cannot rely on government to fix this up. We have to fix it up. Government represents us. So it's time for South Africans to become active citizens, as we were in '94. We have to become active citizens, and it doesn't stop at your gate. It doesn't stop at your water meter. And there's 30 to 40 million South Africans who are poor, who can't afford solar PV, cannot afford a generator, can't afford 3 meals a day, etc. So we need to sort it out. So I think we have a receptive ministry. We still have, I believe, sufficient skills in the country to start rescuing. We have to bring in skills, there's no doubt about it. But I think we've got the core to actually do that. And this perfect storm that we have, and Fred and I in our business have been looking at it, there's no country in the world that has the storm we have where all basic services have failed. Not failing, have failed. And in actual fact, we're a war-ridden nation, far worse than the Russian-Ukrainian war. And we kill more people a day. And we have lower energy uptime. And our water quality is compromised outside of the metros more than in the metros. But we are really struggling. And, let's just think about all those depending on the tourism in KZN, who, especially in the eThekwini area, and everybody thinks the south coast and the north coast is eThekwini, which it isn't. People just not going there. And the tourism industry is actually our only savior because it's labor intensive and all the likes. But for that, we need water and energy. So for me, 2023 is what's going to make or break SADC, not South Africa, SADC. Because if South Africa fails, SADC fails. And really, the Marshall Plan has to start now and has to start with water and energy combined as one. And I think we've got all the paperwork done. Now it's a matter of the action, and the only people who can make government do it is us, the active citizens. I look forward to 2023 when we either turn it around or we watch the very sad horror movie.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. Fred, I do want to ask you to, just for the sake of the audience who does not know the South African Water Chamber, if you could just give us an overview of the chamber, why it was established, who it served, and and how it functions. And then, Anthony, I can ask you if you could perhaps just talk a little bit about, carry on from where Benoit spoke. What impact is the lack of power having on our sewage systems, and just sort of explain to people what the problems are that we're having as a result of a lack of energy on sewage. Fred, I can ask you to just talk about the South African Water Chamber first. Okay, so for anyone in South Africa,
thanks, Brigitte, and I hope my signal lasts. I've got a huge storm where I am, so.
Let's see if we can hear if Fred can come back online. Fred, maybe if you could just refresh and come back into the studio and see, hopefully that will stabilize your signal a bit. Anthony, could we switch to you for a minute and just give Fred some time to sort out his connection?
Yes, by all means, Brigitte. Okay, I think to answer your question about the energy water nexus, I think we're starting to see that happening more and more now. As Benoit so eloquently alluded to earlier on, we've got some very critical ratios or very critical sort of engineering design parameters. And one of them is the time it takes to fill up all of our strategic storage within a metro, within a city. And whatever that volume is and whatever the flow of the pumps is, if your energy has been cut for longer than that period of time, then you start losing your strategic storage and your buffer capacity is lost. We've seen that happen now in Johannesburg area, and we're seeing it happening in other parts of the country. So the two parts of the energy thing in the water space is firstly the provision of potable water to people is now being compromised, and the second thing, which is now of increasing significance, is the failure of our pump stations in the sewage space. So I think we can almost accept now that our sewage systems in South Africa have failed. They're not failing; they have failed. And to get those things going, to get sewage moving in pipes again on that magnitude is a gargantuan task. So we are dealing already now with a failed sewage system. And by virtue of the fact that all of our drinking water in South Africa is sourced from the same rivers where our sewage works discharge into, we're now increasingly going to start seeing a compromise of your water quality and your bulk water provision. So this is a very, very bad news story. However, is there any good news in this space? And we've got to have some good news, and there is some good news. So I think the good news is that I did a media interview earlier this week about the Special Investigative Unit, SIU, and they are now accelerating their prosecutions. So we're starting to see proper, real, serious prosecutions in some of the water boards and in some of the SOEs that are related to the water value supply chain. It's my understanding that this is going to accelerate over time, but we already are seeing that now. So that is a little bit of good news. The other bit of good news that I'm picking up as well, sort of chatter within the let's call it the broader intelligence space, is that the Americans are increasingly becoming interested in pursuing the possibility of targeted sanctions on what they perceive as enablers. As we know, Russia is trying to isolate the American dollar, the petrodollar, etc. So there's this big gargantuan battle taking place between Russia and America. And South Africa has fallen into that trap, unfortunately, through the BRICS, the BRICS configuration, where Russia is now smooching off to us and trying to cut all kinds of deals. And that has made South Africa an ally of Russia, and that has therefore justified targeted economic sanctions. And I think this is going to be something that we're going to start seeing happening in 2023, where your major enablers, in other words, let's call them the oligarchs, the equivalent of the oligarchs that pay significant sums of money over to the ruling elite, they are going to start being targeted, and this I believe is going to happen now. And I think the other point that I would like to just make, I've just written a piece that's gone viral now on what I described as a spider web of our economy. I tried to describe our economy with the energy in the center, and our economy is quite crude. What we do is we burn a unit of coal to flash a unit of water to steam in order to generate electricity, and that's at the very center of the spider web that we call our economy. And as a spider web radiates out from the center, as you go out from the center, you get more and more interlinkages at different levels. And those interlinkages are now starting to radiate out. Much like if you get a stone hitting your windscreen, you see that shattering effect going out from the center where the stone hit the windscreen. We're starting to see that now, because our economy is all about adding value in whatever we do, adding value to that electricity that's produced by flashing water to steam by burning coal. Our entire economy is based on burning coal to make electricity. So it is my professional opinion that this summer holiday we're starting tomorrow, this summer holiday is likely to go down in our history as being the critical year when we start seeing systemic failure coming home, literally coming home over this holiday period of time. So I think we can start anticipating a broader and broader failure across more and more systems, water, energy, sewage-related systems, which are likely to play themselves out as soon as the next month or so. So that's my view of this year.
Thanks very much for that, Anthony. Fred, your connection's better. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Brigitte, and thanks to everyone, and apologies for the loss of signal. I think two things. Firstly, as the water chamber, obviously we've been involved for a while, engaging and with government and saying, as the private sector, we're putting our hand out to assist, to work, to guide, to provide our expertise and services, and to engage with government in order to find solutions to these problems that we are facing. I think, unfortunately, the process has been a very, very long one, and we haven't always had the speed of response and engagement from government that we need. Not only from the absolute importance of making decisions that can ensure we can provide that infrastructure that Tony speaks. So as we make sure that the water sector broadly has a common voice, can have a common leadership and thought leadership position, and can get together in order to make sure that we engage with government and we provide these services. But as Benoit has said, as these services collapse, the risk for our economy, but not only for our economy, for the social cohesion, becomes bigger and bigger. And so the importance of the role that we play as a chamber and the engagement with government, and hopefully the seriousness with which government takes us, becomes more and more important. So the last year, we've seen some great advances in that engagement. It's been wonderful. But I think the importance is the urgency. It's one thing to say we committed and we're working towards something. It's another thing, how do we implement? Where do we start tomorrow? And what do we do?
Thanks very much for that overview, Fred. Hamant, if I can move over to you now. What are some of the things that stood out for you, be it good or bad, for 2022? And what are the challenges that we have stepping into 2023, just as an overview from this year?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brigitte. So I think it's been like a good and a bad year, right? So it starts off good with the issuing of the blue drop and the green drop reports, which have been mentioned, which was a great thing, because whilst a lot of water and sanitation professionals were of the view that the state of our infrastructure and the nature and operation of our wastewater works and our water treatment works was not quite where it should have been, for the first time we had a report here with empirical evidence, which is good news. That demonstrates that, of course, we don't like the findings of that report, but that is science, and that's the fact. That our water treatment plants are not operating as well as they should. One, our wastewater treatment plants are not in any good condition for us to be bragging about whatsoever. They're not in good shape whatsoever. But it was great to have the report, so we were all clear that we know what the status quo is, so that we're not divided in terms of what the current status is. Then we move on to some risks that approached us, which we had no mitigation plans for. For example, climate change is a risk that we've long been aware of, but sadly, we had floods that impacted KZN. We had the supposed drought that impacted Nelson Mandela Bay, right? And across the country, the weather patterns have changed, and our preparedness to respond to these sort of changes were not there in place. Hence, we find that we had destruction of infrastructure. More importantly than that, we didn't have early warning systems in place. From the weather forecasts, for example, I'm told not all of the weather stations currently are even in good shape and working properly, because we need to have some early warning systems so that if we know that you're going to have a disaster, like a flood especially, or a drought in some instances, you can warn people and people can move out of those areas, etc., which didn't happen. So I think the lesson here is we need to better prepare for downside risk. Downside risk, which we often don't think can happen to us. I mean, another case in point is this notion of the electrical supply, power supply, right? I don't think that most utilities, municipalities, and people in the water treatment business and supply business ever envisage that one of their risks would be intermittent power supply. These systems in this country have never been designed for intermittent power supply. Neither has your household been designed for that. There is no appliance in your household that has been designed for the power to be going off and on kind of thing. So you can imagine when you have this huge infrastructure, you don't have this consistent power supply. And as Benoit has rightly said, you're not keeping the system wet. So that's something else that I think that we need to learn a big lesson from. Planning, I think that the other lesson we've learned fast is our planning has been far from perfect. And in instances where your planning has been somewhat perfect, your execution has been dismally poor because you didn't execute according to your plan, which is why you are where you are. Now, I think all of these things put together, sadly, are placing us in a situation where what you have is a whole series of factors that are impacting people so negatively that the morale is now completely shattered. You don't have a notion of consistent power supply. You actually are not confident that you're going to get consistent water supply. When you do get water supply, you sometimes ask the question, it's good to have supply, but is the quality going to be okay? So there comes another dimension. Then you have the problem.
I think we've lost connection with Hamant. Am I correct? Or is it only on my end?
No, we lost it. We lost him.
Too.
So
okay,
I'm still there. Yeah,
there we go.
I may be back. Yeah, hopefully I've painted a picture where all these things happening simultaneously have presented us with an inordinate challenge. What does next year look like? We'd like to believe we're at the end of this year and we're going to have a festive season. Hopefully, I hope what Anthony is suggesting doesn't happen and that we can have a peaceful festive season. And we start the next year on a positive spirit of how we can fix and how we can build. Because we often hear, leaders talking about how much it's going to cost, how much money it's going to take. Yes, it's going to take money. But perhaps we need to change the narrative. Maybe we can have some reporting every day or every week or every month on what little things have we fixed. Positive energy is critical for our country right now. We can't be waking up every day knowing something else is about to break. Let's talk about what we're fixing, albeit small or big. And fixing small things every day can take us where we need to go. Thank you for now, Brigitte.
Thanks very much, Hum. To ask, considering the challenges that we face, water and energy, and we know that the system was designed to be wet. We don't have that. We do not have consistent power supply. Anything that the ordinary citizen at home can do to not contribute towards the sewage system backing up or pipes bursting, is anything that the person at home can do to not make things worse? Anthony, could I put that question to you?
Yes, unfortunately, many of these things are beyond the reach of, many of these solutions are beyond the reach of the individual. This is the simple reality. We have designed our cities, our modern civilization is designed around the notion of the ability to move water into a dense population and to move wastewater out. That's what the Romans did for us. And unless we can reinvent what the Romans did, then I'm afraid it's very difficult for the individual to do something about it, other than going back to a composting toilet or going back to septic tanks, etc., which requires a major redesign of the system. And of course, there's a very, very high cost to that, because whether we like it or not, your centralized systems, although they're expensive, in the big picture of things, the actual unit cost is the lower end of the scale when compared to your individual home solution. So ultimately, we've got to separate out, at least in my opinion, the role that the individual can play, which is a very important role, and we've got to talk about that one. I don't want to trivialize that role. But then the other thing we've got to separate out now is the impact that this all has ultimately on the national economy, because it is really the national economy that is the biggest risk area for us, because as long as the national economy is still performing, we continue to have a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of buffer space. But once that economy starts collapsing, once you cross a threshold when you can no longer employ the number of people you need to employ, once you cross the threshold when you're no longer generating the quantum of taxes that are needed to sustain the bloated and inefficient civil service, that is when you start transitioning into the revolutionary mode. And this, I believe, is where we are now starting. We're testing those limits now. We're starting to find where those event horizons are, where those thresholds are. And this is what worries me very, very badly. So I hope it's answered your question, but that's my view in that matter.
Thanks very much. Benoit, if we could move over to you, if you could just sort of talk a little bit more about what are some of the highlights or lowlights been for you, and especially perhaps in the area where you live, you yourself, Fred, and find yourselves in the business hub of South Africa. So what have the real challenges been on this community in terms of a lack of power and lack of service delivery?
To be honest, we stopped functioning, so we become very inefficient. I'm talking a small business. Big business is crippled. You cannot run an economy on intermittent water and power. As Tony said, it's not designed for that. And in actual fact, the centralization of bulk services is part of what makes the fifth industrial revolution possible. So it is what it is. But as individuals, as Tony says, very little we can do apart from consuming energy and water responsibly, and segregating your waste at source and things like that, because those are basic disciplines that I believe a lot of households don't have. It's got nothing to do with your poverty or your wealth level. That's got to do with personal discipline. But unfortunately, we're seeing in Gauteng a lot of businesses closing. And what worries me is when retail starts shutting down, and the restaurants haven't recovered from COVID, and takeaways are the hardest hit still, apparently, the economists say. And it's because people don't have money in their pockets. And when retail shops are placarded up, and new tenant moving in, and 2 years later nobody's moved in, people just can't afford it. Hairdressers, for example, we employ a lot of people in our area are battling. And they're shutting down. It's supposed to be the busiest time of the year. They don't have power. If you can't wash, and it's no use saying put solar in, they can't afford it. Okay, these are small businesses run mostly by township folk who come into the suburbs and rent space. Okay, and then if you look at the wealthier salons, they're struggling. They're not making money. People haven't had increases. Okay, so there's no disposable income, and that has a cascading effect. When the water, so energy is one thing. When the water stops, everything stops. And I can tell you from my personal experience, it's worn me down to where I'm prepared to pack my bags, take a plane, and squat in Europe. It is, I have a zero hope because I cannot eat my dinner. Okay, I can't eat cold sandwiches every night. Okay, I like bread, but there's a limit to the bread. Okay, but I'm fortunate that I can still buy the bread. A lot of people can't do that. And, so if you have a look at it, the very wealthy don't really get affected because they're able to go off grid and all this type of thing here. But a lot of them, their earnings are not in South Africa either. And this is when you need to be, to be worried. So to not only keep the economy going, to try and reverse the trend of manufacturing 30 million poor people in 30 years, we need to reverse that trend. And for that, we need basic services, and they have to come in bulk. So the energy, water, wastewater, and waste has to be done in bulk. And there are exceptions on the peripheries of it. I accept that. But it's technology driven, and we're not at that level in Maslow's hierarchy. We need to make these services work so that people feel comfortable about coming to this country. Now, when our family all left, come here every 2 years, they say, but why is it more expensive than London and Paris? And it is. So the basic food stuff and services have become so expensive compared to what people earn, overseas. And then you've got all the issues of, well, water's not available today, the quality is not right in this area, so we can't go to that area. And now with the energy load shedding, etc., I'm sorry, our family cancelled. We're supposed to have a big party, yeah? They cancelled. They're not coming. So this festive season for me is like one of the worst that we're ever going to have. We can't do that, and part of our family can't even get, for the last 18 months, cannot get their passports renewed in London, okay, because the embassy refuses to work. So, we must make it difficult. No potholes, reliable water of a reasonable quality. We don't have to have the best quality in the world, reasonable quality, and we have to have energy on. For God's sake, Ukraine's got better energy, and they're being bombed specifically by the Russians, and they're able to keep better uptime than we are. Theirs is more unpredictable because they don't know where the missiles are hitting and the likes. But the thing is, we've got to have these because it's wearing us down. It's worn me down and my family down, and we are, in South African terms, gutful. It can't carry on like that. Okay, it either changes or we change, and we change, we go somewhere else. So it has to do it. The talk shops have to end. We've got magnificent policies. We must start doing things. The problem is national government does the policies, local government has to implement, and local government is broken, it's decrepit, okay, and we've seen it. And eThekwini, that was a thriving tourist destination, can't even provide water or sanitation, okay. I cancelled a conference there. I wasn't going to go present there. The stench apparently is bad. I'm not going to the ICC there, okay. I refuse to do it. Pay me whatever you want, I refuse to go there, okay. And we need to change it because I've got a reasonably privileged position. Now, what about the average person who doesn't have that? They're struggling every day. Now they're struggling, and they go home to the townships and the likes and to the CBDs in Joburg, and there's no water in the CBD. There's no electricity most of the time and all that. We can't function like that, And these people have come, a lot of them have come from other countries in Africa, and some have started going back. So some of our servants left this year, saying that actually in Zimbabwe and Malawi and Uganda and Mozambique, there's better water and energy security. Now, who am I to argue with them? I mean, that's a frightening prospect. that they have got better bulk service security now, and they are really struggling. But they are improving their lot. So South Africa, we've got to wake up, and that's where us as citizens have to become active. We can't sit back. We have to become active and, do something where you can. So us as a water chamber, we can do it in the water sector. We've done as much, I think, as we can. Now it's a matter of putting a lot of pressure through an association like ours, and there are others in energy and other sectors, agriculture, tourism, to make government implement at the coalface, which is at local government, to make sure that we implement what we need to get this economy going. Otherwise, next year is going to be the bad year, and we just can't afford that, because when people are desperate, they will do whatever they want, and we just can't have that. We've got to have the rule of law, and we've got to promise and provide the basic services. Our farmers were telling me last week that down the Orandenku affected this year through two things. One, E. coli in the water. Two, floods. And both are avoidable. So what do? So in the lower Orange River, they're saying that the losses so far, they think this season, they're expecting another two such events this year. 150 million rand in the lower Orange River itself, just the lower Orange, okay, not the upper, more productive areas. So those are huge losses that farmers can't take, and they get the lowest security of supply, the worst quality water, the downstream of everything. Either get not enough water or too much, but now the water's polluted, so it's affecting our exports. So we really need to get the water story right, and I believe if you get the water story right, everything else will come right, because they're all connected to water. Like energy, as we see now, food security and the likes, but we need to do that, and we need to make it attractive for the global community to invest in South Africa. And we're seeing there's a lot of hesitancy to invest in the water sector, because there's going to be good returns. People always need water, and there's going to be industrialization and the growth of the service industry and better dignity. So let's use water, those who are involved in the water sector, to in actual fact start making the change we need in South Africa. It is desperate, okay? I'm not exaggerating. It is really, really desperate.
Thanks very much, Benoit. If we could for a minute just about what's happening in Durban specifically and Quebec. Typically, these are sort of, destinations where people would be looking to for holiday, for surfing, and things. What is the situation there and the outlook for residents in Durban and Quebec? Can I ask you and then Mohammed?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can speak of Durban. I can't speak about Port Elizabeth, but Durban, in my opinion, is in a state of absolute perpetual disaster. I find it absolutely laughable. I mean, it's embarrassing that this week the municipality has announced that they're starting to fix the swimming pools on the beachfront this week. Tomorrow, in fact, today already, the tourists arrive, and now they're starting to fix the swimming pools. I mean, it is an absolute comedy. It is cringingly embarrassing that this is the way the municipality thinks, that at number 99, just the moment before the tourists arrive, they're going to suddenly fix up the swimming pools. But however, having said that, there are parts of the South Coast and part of the North Coast where ordinary citizens have listened to what Benoit is saying, and they've taken things into their own hands. There's a vibrant movement in the Margate, Port Shepstone area called Tidy Towns. And what Tidy Towns has done is what the local municipality has failed to do. With ordinary citizens and ordinary private capital, they've got themselves off the grid. They've fixed up the public swimming pools. They've reclaimed all of the public spaces. They're busy employing the homeless people, getting rid of drug addicts and prostitutes that live in the bushes. They're cleaning up the whole mess. And it's a shining example of what can be done. And the tourism industry along the South Coast is in fact a very, very robust and very vibrant place. So this is what you're starting to see. And I'd also like to say something else, that I'm starting to get more and more information from more and more people about exactly what we're talking about. Ordinary citizens coming together and saying this cannot carry on anymore. And in fact, this week I was contacted, to my great surprise, by an exile. I didn't know we had exiles anymore. I thought the exiles all came home in 1994. And I've been talking to an exile, a current exile who lives overseas in fear of his life. There have been assassination attempts made on this individual. And I mean, it's exactly the same old hit squad activity as we had in the deep, dark days of apartheid. And these people are organizing offshore. They're organizing themselves, and they're talking about effectively taking over, reclaiming the South African economy. And in all of that conversation, they say that it cannot be done with the present ruling party in power. So ultimately, they're talking about regime change. That's really what they're talking about, which starts to frighten me, because I don't want to get involved in regime change kind of stuff, because now we're getting into national security and state security kind of stuff. But this is what is happening. This is happening on the ground at the moment. Ordinary citizens have been pushed to the point where they can no longer absorb much more abuse. And that's why I think that in the next, let's call it the next quarter, the next 3 to 4 months, that we're going to start seeing all of this coming together, because I believe that we're going to see an accelerated rate of collapse of Eskom, and we're going to see an accelerated rate of collapse of our water and sewage systems. And I think this is just going to become the straw that breaks the camel's back, because the economy is completely broken. The fact that it still exists is quite remarkable. But I think all of these things are coming to a head now, and certainly between now and the 2024 national election, this is going to be a time that I think, and it's difficult to make a projection into the future with any accuracy, but I think if you want to look at a proxy indicator, we have to go back to the 1980s and early 1990s in South Africa, when we had things like rolling mass action taking place. We had the birth of the UDF as an alternative to the ANC that mobilized massive grassroots support that ultimately resulted in regime change. And I think this is what you're going to see now between now and 2024. And I think it's going to be an extremely unpredictable time. What we can predict, though, is that the South African economy is generally uninvestable, so we're not likely to attract the kind of capital that we need. Therefore, we're not likely to attract the kind of job creation capability that we require, and that's going to simply accelerate it. And there's another interesting new phenomenon that I'm starting to detect now, and that is that one of your historic power bases in South Africa was organized trade union activity under the banner of COSATU. And what we are now seeing is that COSATU members are privileged elites. They no longer represent the masses, because the masses are either unemployed or are employed at best in the most marginal of jobs without any union protection. So we're starting to see the trade union movement being no longer representing the grassroots of South Africa, regarded as an elite. And we're even seeing comments made by the leadership now that they're no longer going to endorse certain political figures, etc., etc. So there's a major change coming within the tripartite alliance. And I think this is going to be felt. We can't predict how it's going to play out, but I believe this is going to be felt, in over the next couple of months, and increasingly as we approach 2024.
Thanks very much for that, Anthony. Hamad, the comment from you?
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about Durban and the beaches, etc., Tony is better placed, and he did mention, on the South Coast, what is happening. But one of the things that I'm finding is that the people are not confident and are not trusting the municipality with the information that they're making available. Because, they purport that the beaches are safe, and then the people are doing their own research and looking at their own analysis, and they're showing that they're not safe. So I think that this whole notion of trust, if you don't have faith and trust in service delivery and the people that should be delivering your services, this creates a whole different phenomenon in this country of mistrust at the central government level, of mistrust at the municipal level. And so, when you get news that, you're not going to have load shedding from next week, for example, nobody wants to believe that kind of thing, saying, well, no, this can never happen. We were told this 10, 15 years ago. And that trust deficit is going to end up creating a huge problem in this country with people that are already angry, frustrated, much poorer off than a year or two ago because of the economy. Not entirely our doing here economically, somewhat our doing, but somewhat an impact from the global phenomenon that's occurring in the world. And our inability to respond to these kinds of challenges, timelessly, a lot of prevarication, a lot of debate, very little decisive action, very little positive news. It doesn't make for the right cocktail of having a country that is like, feeling great about where you are type of thing. And I think that's the whole mixture, the blend that needs to be changed. And that change has to be led by government on the one hand, but then the people have to do their own thing as well in their own way. Otherwise, we're just going to end up in a vortex of diminishing return, as I call it.
Thanks very much, Hamant. Fred, if I can switch over to you now, what is the outlook from the business community for 2023? Are there any positives? What are the challenges? Is there anything to look forward to? Is that a trick question?
Better communications. Fred, you're muted, and I think your
microphone isn't on.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure if we can make that work. Let's give Fred just a moment. Okay, it looks. There we go. Looks like we've got Fred back. No. Okay. Well, I'll let to see if he can sort that out. Benno, what is the business outlook so far?
Sorry, say that again, Bridget.
What is the business outlook for 2023?
I think everybody's sitting on the edge of their chair to see is Eskom. So 10 years ago, the IMF said Eskom would be involved in a fire sale, they call it, when state assets are basically given away because they're worth nothing. So I think the first we're going to see is Eskom. We've seen there's a private grid operator for transmission. Part of the Remgro group was launched 2 weeks ago. And that's quite significant, because what that means is that we can now trade in electricity outside of Eskom. And it has to be regulated through NERSA, but the rules have been relaxed. So it's not just a generation of over 100 megawatt, it's actually wheeling around the energy off the Eskom grid. So that's the first thing. I think we're going to see that happen. De Ruyter's resignation, and I just hope they don't do what we think they're going to do, and that they let the guy live in peace. And I believe he's not in the country. But anyway, we must get out of this kangaroo court mentality. But I think Eskom is broken, and literally it will be broken up. The important part is to have the transmission, what's left of it, to be operated semi-autonomously, and that will be done by the private sector. Eskom has no money. But what this is going to do is, and we saw the IPPs failed now also. The last round failed, less than a quarter were bankable, and that's because of not only the sovereign guarantee issue, it's actually because the grid can't take it. So what that means is it's a free-for-all within the NERSA umbrella. So I believe there's going to be a reasonable amount of regulation, although NERSA's got a lot of work to do because its governance is not very good. But we got an independent water regulator also that was supposed to happen this year. It didn't happen. Must happen next year. What's going to happen, we're going to see the same in the water, where it's going to be deregulated, but we must keep the quality and quantity within manageable norms. And what we're going to see, this is going to happen rapidly. What we've got to stop happening is the oligarch syndrome, where all this stuff lands up for half a cent going through to the ruling elite. Okay, and I think we have a more sophisticated system than what the Russians had, or the Soviets had. Went back to Russia. We hope. I don't know, but I think we have. The Russians didn't have a lot of international finance. The EU, the USA, the Japanese, and all the likes. We do. So we really can't do everything our own way. We owe a lot of money to a lot of people, the bond markets and all the likes. We do have a fairly vibrant stock exchange despite this all. So I think we're going to see the deregulation of the water markets, and that's going to make a whole lot of things investable. Now, all of a sudden, the municipalities are going to have to, which they're doing already. They've started in the Western Cape about 6-9 months ago, and they're starting in Gauteng. They're talking now the last 3 months. So starting to happen where you go outside of the government ambit and Eskom, and you start procuring your energy from alternatives. Water is a bit more difficult because it's nationalized. I believe it's going to be denationalized next year. Okay, I'm quite confident it will be denationalized, because socialism and communism has failed. Nobody argues that anymore. So it's going to be denationalized. And what we're going to see is a water trading environment that's going to actually thrive. The only thing we have to make sure that it is regulated like the financial markets are and the likes, and the health market regulated, so there's no abuse, that the rich take it all and leave the leftovers for the poor. We've got to avoid that happening. So I think we're on the cusp of, and it's not privatization, it's a matter of combining private momentum and money and capability with the inefficient, inept government machinery, a paracheck, and making it business friendly so that these resources can be used and leveraged. And we're seeing it happening in Australia and the Western states, and it's happening to an extent that's actually quite encouraging, where the water is also nationalized to an extent. But what's happening is we're starting to see the trade, the freer trade and movement and efficiency drive, and people get rewarded for the efficiency, okay, between various consumers and the likes. And South Africa, we saw with mobile phones. Unfortunately, with potholes also, we're quick adopters of these things. So we're very, very rapid adopters of new technology. I think we're going to see that happening. That to me is the high road, as Tim Santa would say. I don't want to talk about the low road. I've already spoken about it. It's not an option. We can't do that. I think that's the high road. So let's follow the energy collapse into deregulation, and let's see how this can happen in water. And if we don't, then it's, you get the cheapest ticket out. But so that's going to happen, and it's going to be around like the minerals, and you'll pay a license for access to these resources and all the likes. And and just lastly is what's enabling a lot of this, and we've seen this happening in the more progressive areas, but now we're starting to see it in sub-Saharan Africa, is the digitization of the water value chain. And what that's doing is helping us to breach that trust deficit that we have, that Hamad was talking about and Tony talks about a lot too, between government and the private sector, which COVID didn't help us. Because one is able to then get a decentralized point of truth that is the truth. So, it's not, is the water good or not? This is what was done. It's accessible. You can see the provenance and the likes, and you start rebuilding the trust. So digitization of the water value chain is as good as a mobile phone is, okay? So, go back to the tap. You're going to have a digital tap connected to Bluetooth. Believe in me, you're going to have, but the utility will have it, the reserve will have it, and all the likes. And so whatever happened with, the trading of water not allowed and all this, I believe next year is going to see all this change happening because we have no choice. And to me, it's a matter of doing it in a planned fashion so that abuse, there's always abuse in humans who are greedy, but that abuse is limited, and so that we can have enough for everybody to share. So from that perspective, we go down that route, I hope. Okay, where I sit right now, it's very, very difficult. But I think there's a good chance we can get to that because, quite honestly, I think South Africans are gutful.
Thanks very much, Benoit. So let's try Fred again. Fred, if we can have your outlook for 2023. Anthony, your outlook next. And then Hamad, in closing, your outlook for 2023, please.
I think it's going to be turbulent. Okay, if Fred is not responding, can I come in then?
I think yes, please, Anthony, if you can go ahead. I think Fred's still having an issue with his connection.
Okay, right. So my outlook for next year, I'm afraid I'm a little bit pessimistic. I think that 2023 is going to be a turbulent year. I think it's really going to be a turbulent year. And when I say turbulent, I think we've had a foretaste of it with this nationwide strike. We've had a strike of Home Affairs, etc., and civil service employees starting to go on strike, demanding salary increases in excess of inflation. So I think next year we're going to start seeing a number of things converge. On the economic side, I think we're going to see inflation starting to take hold, and we're going to start seeing very, very importantly job losses on an accelerating scale. We're also going to see a collapse of the revenue stream to the state. Simply because as your small businesses start collapsing, so the taxes that they pay also start collapsing. So I think those are going to be the big economic drivers next year. I cannot see South Africa attracting foreign direct investment at the level and scale that we need to turn this thing around. So while it's all good and nice to talk about a Marshall Plan, we really do need a Marshall Plan, but I cannot see the Marshall Plan being viable in our current legislative environment, where our current legislative environment effectively enshrines the capture of the economy, if you like, by racially defined means. I think that has got to go. So I think you're going to see a rearguard action by the RET faction, in particular over this whole issue of BEE. Well, is BEE viable? Is it here to stay, or is it not? And I think you're going to have a big ding-dong battle around that. My personal opinion is that South Africa cannot prosper as long as we've got the BEE regulations that we currently have. So my personal view is that is a major impediment to the inflow of capital, and of course that's not going to be easily done away with. So we are likely to see a ding-dong battle over attempts to protect that. And as I say, from the first quarter of next year, building up to 2024, this is going to be the election era where you're going to start seeing things popping out of the woodwork that are unpredictable. Things like, for example, the Pala case suddenly where Fraser suddenly comes up with some story about foreign money in a sofa somewhere. You're going to get that kind of stochastic event, unpredictable event, and all of this is just political mischief making. People being set up to fail, and we're going to see more and more of that over time. And I think at the same time, we're going to start seeing some green shoots, and those green shoots are going to be the prosecutions of some of the high profile figures, and I think we're also going to start seeing the first targeted sanctions of your enablers, simply because the South Africa has made this policy choice to actively support Russia in the war, and to actively side with attempts by China and Russia to break down the dollar dominance, the petrodollar dominance. So that has set South Africa up as a relatively small player in a very, very big game. And I think they're going to be crushed like a bug on a windscreen when it comes to that. And the bug that's going to be crushed is going to be the targeted sanctions of the oligarchs. I think that's if I was an advisor for their side, that's what I would say. Go for the big fish, target them, and you're going to just take out the revenue streams to the ruling elite. So that's what my prediction would be for next year.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Hamant, your prediction for 2020?
It's not very exciting, is it? Well, from what I hear, Tony's painted the picture about, the macro situation, the politics and so forth. So I won't go down that track. But let me approach it in a different way. Can things actually get worse from where we are? I'd like to believe it can't. But, I have to say it can. And it will. So have we reached rock bottom? I don't think so. I'd like to believe in my soul and heart that we have as a professional, and we should have learned from this, and we should be turning the corner. But something tells me that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. Now, I think that what can really bring to bear, I respect fully that next year is a year which is prior to the election year. So the politicians will be politicking. I mean, that's just a fact of life, right? But somewhere, somehow, I'm hoping that the politicians find some time to improve service delivery, because that's what we're talking about. And I think if we can even have like an emergency national initiative between the public sector and the private sector to say, the one thing we have to agree on is service delivery in terms of water, sanitation, and power is critical to economic growth. Despite what happens in political elections, we need to fix this. And if we can galvanize around that, I'd like to believe there is hope so we don't allow it to get worse before it gets better. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I had to chuckle to myself and I thought, before we even get to economic growth, we just need to, we're already in survival mode, I think, at the moment. It's just trying to survive. Can it break anymore? I'd shudder to think what would happen if the system became even just a little bit more broken than what we already have. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm glad we've made it to the top of the hour, given that we've all had challenges. I see Benoit has dropped off along with Fred. That's just what it is with this power situation that we've got at the moment. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you also to Fred and to Benoit for joining us today. And I think we're going to close off by saying, we wish everyone that's joined us on the show, whether you've watched the show live, thank you for your support over the last couple of months. We are going to remain positive for the new year, that things will turn around and it won't decline anymore. So stay safe, have a good holiday, travel well, and we look forward to welcoming you back new year, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more of a positive outlook then. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much.